I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. The Thurgood Marshall College Fund writes in 2024 that, quote, major policies require Congress, but executive orders influence the internal affairs of government in deciding how and to what degree legislation will be enforced, and in general fine-tuning policy, unquote. When evaluating the benefits and harms of executive orders, we urge the judges to focus on how the system as a whole functions rather than only on individual examples, as there are checks in place for the states, courts, and Congress. Just as we wouldn't call Congress on balance harmful for passing some bad laws, we can't dismiss executive orders for the same. Thus we affirm, and our sole contention is a systemic necessity. Subpoint A is design. Congress is structured to be slow. Indiana University in 2023 explains that Congress not only is not designed for quick action, but structured to slow things down so that matters of national importance can get a careful look, unquote. This and all of this underscores the need for swift policy action, which comes from the executive. Samosky 25 concludes, the founders left executive power broadly defined so the president can act in whatever situation that might arise. The broad nature does not mean unlimited, unquote. Subpoint B is crisis. Duncan 10 finds that executive orders respond to urgent national needs as in wartime, post-war reconstruction, and disasters. If the president must wait for Congress, it could render the country vulnerable to considerable harm. Nevertheless, Congress may act when it feels that the president overstepped, unquote. We saw this speed empirically solve crises multiple times. One example was the bank holiday. The Federal Reserve in 2013 corroborates that Roosevelt ordered the suspension of all banking transactions in 1933. Holders of U.S. currency were rapidly losing faith in paper money and redeeming dollars at an alarming rate. The bank holiday permitted the country to calm down and allow time for legislation as the crisis began to subside only 4 days after, unquote. Without this use of the executive order, our country wouldn't even be the same. Sullivan 20 finds, the banking holiday marked the turning point of the Great Depression. As the banks reopened, a recovery began that wouldn't have been possible had the public not only been convinced to quit withdrawing their money, but to start putting it back, unquote. Without this intervention, America's entire banking system would have collapsed in 1933, extending the Great Depression indefinitely and affecting the lives of 125 million Americans. Another major example is public health emergencies. During COVID, Biden's orders were fundamental to saving Americans. Morris 21 explains that Biden's national strategy for COVID includes executive orders and totals 200 pages. Biden issued the executive order to provide a unified and effective response, which established a national response structure to coordinate across the federal government, unquote. As a result, the American Presidency Project in 2025 concludes that the national strategy mobilized 90,000 vaccination locations and achieved 200 million vaccines within 100 days, unquote. Crisis response will always be imperative for our nation in saving our citizens, and executive orders are not just instrumental in doing and achieving that, but the only way to do so. Subpoint C is cooperation. Civics for Life No Date explains that executive orders set the tone for national debates, shape public policy, and put pressure on Congress to act, unquote. As a result, Stratton 24 concludes that civil rights executive orders from Eisenhower and Truman were executed in tandem with congressional legislation. The friction and cooperation they generate serve as a testament to the American system of governance, which balances strong leadership with necessary restraint. They exemplify the balance of power envisioned by the Founding Fathers and sustain our constitutional republic, unquote. Our impact is the system. Ray Nodate finds that executive orders are the primary tools for the management and mobilization of the vast resources of the federal government, unquote. This is why Slomowski 25 concludes that government is ineffective unless there is a strong enough executive to ensure the government is well administered, unquote. This serves as a prerequisite to the rights and security of our nation's citizens, as Smith 16 concludes. Governance is a critical precursor to peace and security. Failed states, by contrast, do not have the institutions that foster good governance. As such, they are breeding grounds for war and insecurity. Efforts to secure peace and security require governance first and foremost, unquote. Without functioning governance through directing agencies, fine-tuning policies, speed in crisis, and friction between branches, no rights, progress, or peace can exist, and because those values come above all else, we are proud to affirm.
Is everyone ready? Come on, first word. We negate the resolution that, on balance, in the United States, the benefits of presidential executive orders outweigh the harms. Contention 1 is deportations. Trump is utilizing executive orders to expedite mass deportations. Now, as Vera 25 reports that in his first week, Trump issued a dozen executive actions to advance his mass deportation agenda. Trump's major executive order directs the Department of Homeland Security to expand detention infrastructure and detain everyone arrested pending deportation. Trump's actions expand expedited removal, and it allowed the DHS to detain and deport on an accelerated timeline without hearing before an immigration judge. Moreover, Trump aims to deport all undocumented immigrants without exception. Heston 24 confirms that Trump aims to deport all immigrants in the U.S. illegally over his 4-year term. Unfortunately, the majority of the agricultural workforce compromises of undocumented immigrants, and Calic et al. 25 finds that over half of crop workers in the U.S. are undocumented, and empirically, agriculture suffers from immigration policies and restrictions. Cabrera 24 finds that states where these policies were adopted realized lower profits. Farmers tried to adopt technology, but there's no substitute for the loss of labor. Millions of dollars in crops and tens of thousands of jobs were left unfilled by these policies. The subsequent decrease in exports and production would be devastating for global food supply chains. Historically, Wrench 23 finds that shocks to agricultural production can drive up prices, provoke famine and poverty for millions of people across the globe. And Puma and McConnell of 2017 of Columbia University terminalizes that the U.S. is a world superpower to global food production. A minor disruption in the U.S. supply could cascade rapidly and cause a shock. The impact is starvation, as Crib 10 concludes that billions will experience hardship. The imminent threat to the human race is starvation. Food shortages and famine are the greatest threat the human race has ever faced. And contention 2 is climate. Trump's return puts climate progress at risk, as Bird et al. 25 find that the need for clean energy development has become more urgent in recent years, and with new administration creating roadblocks, it may become harder to make progress. Upwards trends signal that clean sources are increasingly vital part of the U.S. economy and power system. Unfortunately, Trump's executive orders ensure a halt to development, as Simmons 25 reports that within hours of his inauguration, Trump signed 26 executive orders which directly altered the U.S. environmental policy. This includes withdrawal from the Paris Accords, rolling back regulation of emissions, rescinding environmental protections, and scaling back restrictions on fossil fuels. Specifically, rollbacks dismantle federal climate regulations, as Lindwall 25 explains that without these rules, the goal of curbing pollution in half by 2030 will be completely out of reach. As the biggest carbon emitter, the U.S. success in meeting targets is essential in the global effort to limit total warming. Power plant standards alone could result in an 80% reduction in emissions, and that's devastating, as the U.S. will be key in spearheading clean transitions globally, as MIT 24 finds that the U.S. is the largest economy and cumulative emitter in the world. Every nation looks to us for leadership. If we delay action, other countries are likely to do the same. Trump withdrew from the Paris Accords after the U.S. left. The pace of climate action slowed. As Trump rolled back climate actions that were reducing emissions, countries felt less pressure to make commitments or even roll back their own regulations. And climate action operates on a narrowing timeline. Delays now are deadly, as Bennett 25 writes that delaying action may lock in irreversible outcomes. Climate thresholds are real and near. The cleanest course is to slash emissions now. Moreover, congressional gridlock prevents legislating permanent climate protections. Crop 25 furthers that Trump's ordered blitz recognition weakness. The difficulty of passing legislation is slim. Majorities in Congress gridlock persisting. Executive orders allow him to advance his agenda without requiring congressional approval and without regulation. Spectre 19 concludes that climate change poses an existential risk to human civilization. Government ignoring scientists. By 2050, the planet plunges into hotter conditions. Droughts, floods, and wildfires regularly lavish the land. Entire ecosystems collapse. The human race has one decade left, and at best, Casella 23 terminalizes that for every 0.1 degrees Celsius of warming, the world could suffer 100 million deaths. Global warming is a matter of life or death for a billion people. Thus, we negate the resolution. Yeah. You can have first question.
All right. Who sets deportation policies in America?
The government, but Trump specific.
Well, no, like who sets like the statute to do deportation policies at a mass scale?
Right now, Trump specifically with executive orders enacted mass deportation policy.
Wait, I'm confused. Executive orders are just instructions.
Yep.
How do deportation policies become large scale?
He instructed the government to deport people.
Would you agree that it's Congress who makes these statutes have large deportations? So why is it inherently like Congress's fault?
What?
Like Congress makes the mass deportation policies, so isn't it the fault of
Trump
Congress?
made the mass deportation policies through executive orders.
No, but okay.
Sure. So, if the resolution is on balance, do the benefits of executive orders outweigh the harms? Shouldn't we be looking at the total value of good or bad that executive orders have contributed to the world?
Yeah, we should. And that's 250 years worth of history you have to analyze. You only talk about 2 executive orders into your entire case, talking about deportations and climate change. That's 2 executive orders over 14,000. That's nowhere near indicative of the system of 14,000 executive orders of a 250-year history of America. So we would argue that to look at the system and an executive order as a tool and not the all like too small.
But is it not hypocritical that in your case you bring up this one example of Roosevelt, but then say not to look at specific examples?
No, we say you can have examples because otherwise you wouldn't have any outcomes to look at. But we say that you can't look at only 2 examples of bad executive orders and expect the judges to believe that on balance executive orders have been more harmful than good over the course of our history. Obviously you need to have examples, but you can't only rely on them.
All right, do you have a question?
Yeah. You talk about migrant workers, but if the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, came out this year and said that 83% of our crop workers are immigrant, then how can you say that it's indicative of the system of agriculture?
Wait, what?
Like, if the USDA, okay, like how much of people are in crop workers are immigrants or undocumented immigrants?
We read that in case it's a very large majority.
No, like are undocumented immigrants, not just immigrants, but undocumented.
Yeah, large majority. A very significant amount, enough to cause food shocks, as what historically, actually we've seen with empirics that when immigration policy tightens, then yeah, sure.
Are all of these crop workers going to get deported?
Yes, Trump. We read in case that Trump says that he wants to deport all undocumented immigrants without exception.
But does that mean he will actually achieve that?
I mean, he's on track to right now.
Okay, you can answer.
Sure. So, can you can you re-explain your subpoint C real quick?
Yeah, we're saying that executive orders still shape public policy and put pressure on Congress to act. That's the Civics for Rights and No Data evidence. And we give an example from Eisenhower and Truman when they passed civil rights executive orders. They worked in tandem with congressional legislation. So while Congress is designed to be slow, they can act quickly with executive orders by their side.
All right. That's basic.
We'll start.
A brief overview, and then we'll go down the case. Is everybody ready? Awesome. We'll start in 3, 2, 1. The government must run. Insofar as executive orders are an instrumental part of our system used by every single president for the past 250 years, you always know that the couple of bad apple examples they give you from the last 200 days never outweigh 200 days of history, or 200 years of history. You always vote the heaviest on the government functioning in the past, the present, and far into the future because their benefits are their harms are temporary and our benefits are forever. Let's go into their first contention of mass deportation. There's 4 main responses. Firstly, realize one thing. Congress is the entity in our government who sets the deportation policy. Gooding on February 2nd reads, quote, the Biden administration deported 4.6 million people. What we see fundamentally is it's not the choice of the administration how many people to deport, but rather Congress. You can't indict executive orders because it's Congress who's causing deportations after administration after administration. But secondly, Donald Trump to go through with his mass deportation plans needs a massive reallocation of resources, which is unlikely to happen. Kilgore 25 reads, quote, mass deportation cannot happen on the level he's promised without a significant shift of resources from Congress. Insofar as we haven't seen any shifts of resources from Congress, we're not going to see mass deportation on the scale that causes mass global famine. Don't let them tell you that. But thirdly, on this mass global famine idea, they tell you that these hits to agricultural workers is going to cause a starvation all around the globe, which is going to kill everybody. Don't let them get away with this. What we see is they don't tell you how long it takes for this to happen. They don't tell you how many people need to get deported. They don't tell you if Trump's plan is going to do this or not. They just say any shock, make them tell you an executive order is. They don't have evidence saying that. That's because it doesn't exist. But fourthly, the reason it doesn't is because our agriculture workforce largely isn't migrant immigrants. Caduce talks about the USDA, telling you how the majority of them are documented and legal citizens of the US, they're not getting deported. But furthermore, Maslami in 2024 corroborates, saying, quote, lawful immigrants made up the majority of the immigrant workforce. Only 4.8% were undocumented. What we see fundamentally is that they're way overblowing the numbers. Don't let them tell you there's going to be a massive starvation from one set of executive orders that are unlikely to get a reallocation of resources from Congress in the first place. Let's go to their C2 of climates. There's three main responses here. Firstly, they're picking out a couple of bad apples from the last 100 days of the Trump administration. When we look at, on balance, all executive orders in history, we see things like the Carter administration, who massively bolstered the EPA and made it to the entity it is today. We see the things like Joe Biden did just last year, as the American Presidency Project quotes, the order directs all executive departments to immediately review and take action to address climate change. What we see is that fundamentally, presidents who are making good action on climate change, on balance, we see more good actions than bad. You always weigh the government functioning first, though, because without a government that functions, and without the executive order allowing our government to function, we don't have any climate action at all. But secondly, they're going to tell you that climate action is really, really bad right now. But that's not the case. Atkinson and Hewley in 2025, which postdates them, tell you, quote, that solutions continue the race forward as clean tech becomes cheaper than ever, and positive tipping points are happening worldwide. Multiple analyses show that peak and decline in 2025, more than half of countries already 5+ years past their peak in carbon emissions. Things are really good in the world of green tech. But thirdly, they don't tell you how many emissions they're decreasing. They just say that executive orders are causing this. They don't tell you how much emissions are going up or if it's going to lead to mass climate extinction. What you weigh on the heaviest is the fact that the executive order is an essential piece of our government and has been for 200+ years. They're going to try to tell you that Donald Trump can do whatever he wants, but that's not true. Peterson 19 writes, quote, a president's ability to control the levers of power can be augmented by the historical moment. While presidents today hold more power than when the Constitution was written, the powers of the institutions that come to curb them and our checks and balances have grown as well. We see they're part of the system. You always affirm because they maintain that system.
We're going to take one question. Okay, it's just going to be our side, their side. Okay, is anybody not ready? Time will start on my first word. Okay, we're kicking out of deportations, go for climate. They give you a couple responses. First, they talk about the Carter and the Biden administration, but remember that you should be looking to the status quo. Insofar as you know that Linwall 25 finds that rolling back these specific regulations is bad right now, and insofar as Linwall finds that rolling back these regulations ensures that we cannot solve for climate change, you're still preferring the act. Then they say that countries are on path to solve for climate change, but remember, A, their evidence doesn't consider the implications of Trump's executive orders, but then second, they also concede that empirically countries look to the US as a leader in climate leadership. But then they say that we don't quantify how much emissions go down. Remember that the problem is with consistency. Executive orders allow for constant changes, like in the Paris Accord examples that we give you, and withdrawal right now is uniquely bad. That's what they concede. Moreover, yes, we do. We say that it's an 80% reduction in case. With that, go to their side of the flow. start on their framing. First, even if good and bad orders exist, you still have to weigh the impact. That's what the resolution is asking us to do. A single harmful EO can outweigh dozens of minor benefits. That's why the resolution is asking us to consider on balance. But then second, some EOs, like those enabling deportations or climate, carry far more weight than routine directives. But third, we'd also saying that we can't look to specific EOs lets harmful orders off the hook and shields abuse from scrutiny. Like Kevin tells them in First Cross, if they cite examples like crisis response to prove the app, then specific cases do matter. They can't just cherry pick what examples they want to use. But with that, go to their case. Start on their subpoint A of Congress. First, executive orders only worsen the gridlock by increasing polarization. It's not a good workaround, as Halliday 22 finds that immediate reversals of a previous executive order creates a polarized environment. These reversals exemplify notable differences between opponents, and since they are enacted so quickly, it gives an immediate reason to dislike the new president. Polarization of a country is a push towards democratic erosion. While executive orders may be seen as initially an essential way to get things moving in Washington, the downsides outweigh the positives. But then second, we'd say it's cyclical. Polarization leads to more gridlock. As Tutela 24 explains, that according to researchers, as polarization increased, Congress passed fewer bills. This happens because polarization introduces greater friction to policy making. Then we also say that EOs are not effective at combating gridlock either. Sequel 24, the main workaround for gridlock has been more unilateral action by the executive, and they hinder congressional action. But on McNeil 25, we're going to say that executive orders are actually used less during times of gridlock, as presidents use fewer executive orders during times of divided government. But then they say that Congress acts when executive orders overreach. Turn back to their first subpoint. They themselves tell you that Congress is designed to be slow. Thus, reject any claims that executive orders can be checked when they concede that Congress isn't efficient enough to take action. But then we'd also say that Congress and the courts empirically do not check executive orders. No Rest on October 10th finds that the natural order in our republic has been for the scale and scope of the presidential power to increase and for congressional power to decrease. Presidential power has burgeoned over the course of American history. But then we'd also say that overturning an executive order is difficult. That's Halliday 22, which finds that the process for Congress is lengthy. They would have to pass a bill that blocks the order. But specifically on crisis response, we're going to say that look to the status quo right now. New Trump executive orders are bad for crisis response. It shifts the burden to state and local governments, as Udarvi 25 finds that the executive order shifts more responsibility for response onto the shoulders of state and local governments. Response and recovery will be more chaotic and ineffective. But then they talk about the example of COVID. We're going to say that EOs empirically spark confusion during COVID. Remember that Trump's executive order sparked confusion and delayed congressional action. That's Rahm et al. 2020. Then go to governance. First, we're going to say that executive orders have allowed Congress to abdicate its rulemaking authority, causing trillions in debt. Dean 22 writes that Congress has delegated much of its lawmaking capacity to an alphabet soup for the regulatory agencies known as the administrative state. The administrative state opposes almost $1.9 trillion in annual costs, and that's overall worse. Insofar as A, you know that less funds means that Congress is overall less effective, but then B, extend Wallach 20 on gridlock, that the sense that legislation is impossible becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Gridlock is fueled by executive orders. Thank you.
Are you ready for the talk?
Yeah.
I'm going to sit down. I'm good. Is it awkward if I'm the honest? Alright, I'll take the first. Let's talk about checks and balances. Is Congress the only way to check back on an executive order?
I mean, no, we said there are other ways, and they are doing so right now.
Okay, well, yeah, when we tell you that those institutions have grown along with executive power, then how can we say that these checks are good? When you only mention Congress.
Sorry, can you explain that?
Like when our Peterson 19 evidence that I read you in rebuttal, which you can see too, tells you that these institutions grow in tandem with presidential power, how can we say that just because Congress is failing, the checks are failing broadly?
Sure, I mean, we're still going to make the analysis that Congress is checking right now. We have seen that the courts are checking several of Trump's executive orders.
So is that not a good thing?
Sorry.
Okay, you can take it.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Let's go on to Sure. So, on the Carter administration and the Biden administration,
yeah.
Can you name me a couple executive orders that were passed that helped?
Yeah. So we read you the Biden. I don't have the name of the Biden administration, but they took immediate action to direct all agencies to be more climate efficient. The Carter administration passed a flurry of executive orders that all bolstered the Environmental Protection Agency and made it to the points where we have the regulations you talk about in the first place that got cut by Trump. So when we look at the topic on balance, we can't just focus on one guy. Because this guy's going to be out of term in 4 years.
But are those executive orders still in place now? These
executive orders are some of them are still in place now. The Carter ones specifically are definitely still in place now.
Right, but wouldn't you agree that when presidents can constantly reverse other executive orders, that's overall worse?
Yeah, but they're still in place now. And you never tell us how many are reversed at all, if any, but our evidence would show you like 75% if you want to read that, we can, or 75% aren't reversed. So like, but what we see fundamentally is when we look at the topic on balance, when we look through all of history, we see that overall, executive orders have helped the climate as much as they hurt the climate. So that's why we tell you prefer to look at it as a systemic issue and see how these executive orders help our government in the first place and help it function and run smoothly. Because without that, you can't have any climate response at all. Okay, but I'll take the question. Let's talk about like emissions. Sure. How many emissions is Donald Trump's cuts
Increasing?
Yeah.
I mean, we would say that the current policy, before Trump issued his executive orders, we were on track to solve. That's why our evidence finds that without these regulations, we wouldn't be able to decrease 80% of the emissions that we already were doing.
Okay, how much less do we have? How much less are we decreasing?
80, like the evidence that we read specifically in case finds that before Trump issued these executive orders, we were on track to solve.
Okay, we are on track to reduce emissions by 80%. How much are we on track to reduce them by now?
Off the top of my head, I cannot.
Okay, so we don't know how much we're like increasing emissions by at all.
Right, but you guys also concede the Lindwall 25 evidence, which finds that without these specific regulations, we cannot solve for climate change.
But I mean,
even if you try to make the analysis that we can't quantify how much emissions are being decreased under Trump's executive orders, you guys still concede that evidence, which finds that without those specific regulations, we cannot solve.
Sir. Off the clock, I'll just go in contra. Okay. I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. They read you evidence time and time again about how rolling back regulations to Trump's executive orders is so bad. But insofar where they give you no number to actually weigh or consider, you can't even vote on it. You don't know what you're voting on for their side. And in rebuttal, they never extend their impact, meaning it got lost on the flow. Don't let them get it back in summary. But remember, executive orders have been used long to help climate change as much as it's been used to hurt it. That's why we have to argue the system. And insofar that the Gully 25 evidence, which is from this year and postdates their evidence, says that the transition worldwide is fast enough, and more than half of the countries in the world are 5 years past their peak, you recognize that they're overblowing the issue and you can't even vote on it. But the biggest thing they never respond to is Peterson 19, that the power of presidential power is growing exponentially, but so is the power to curb it. And so far that they never respond to that piece of evidence, you always prefer us because whatever bad things Trump is doing right now will be checked in the future and are getting checked right now. But let's go on to our side of the flow. They say we have to weigh the impacts in a specific examples of the resolution. We agree, but you can't solely vote on them for one executive order Trump passed this year about climate change. You need to weigh these side on balance of 250 years of American history, of 14,000 executive orders, and one bad executive order isn't enough for you to negate. But let's get to specific on our case. They talk a whole bunch about gridlock. That's not the premise of our argument. We say that Congress is designed to be slow. That's the Indiana University 23 evidence. That sure may have some fast moments, but because it's structured to be slow, with hundreds of representatives meeting to compromise on a bill, we need something for fast-acting policy. Remember, they never respond to our Thurgood Marshall 24 evidence, the first carbon case, that executive orders influence the internal affairs of our government, decide what and to what degree legislation will be enforced, and fine-tuning policies, meaning it's a problem to our system, or it's systemic and it's a necessity. You always buy the fact that without a government, we don't have any benefits or any harms. They never respond to that argument once. It's a prerequisite to everything they talk about. But let's get specific onto subpoint B. They talk about how Congress is slow to check. No, it isn't. There's more than one thing to check the executive. There's states, there's courts, and there's other ways. That's not just Congress. But they never respond to our bank holiday example. That in 1933, the biggest threat facing America was the Great Depression, and an executive order was what got us out of it. It stopped the banking system from collapsing and saved 125 million Americans. They also never respond to COVID, that an executive order issued 200 million vaccines across our nation and worldwide spread, which is imperative to saving citizens across the world. The biggest thing they never respond to is Ray 24, that executive orders are the primary tool to manage our federal government, and Smith 16 is very clear in saying that governance is a critical precursor to peace and security. That's what you weigh on our side, because no rights, progress, or peace can exist without our government. They never respond to that, and they never tell you how much climate change is decreasing in our world, meaning there's no impact for them. But the biggest thing they never respond to is cooperation. That executive orders can spur Congress into acting. We saw this during civil rights, and we saw this during climate executive orders. And because of this, it serves as a testament to our system of governance, because without it, there wouldn't be even a government in the first place. And that's why you should always vote.
We're going to take running back. Time starts now. It was 44 seconds. It's just going to be their case, our case. Remember what Nelson said in rebuttal, starting on their framing, even if good and bad orders exist, we have to weigh impacts. A single harmful executive order can outweigh dozens of minor benefits. That's why the resolution is asking us to consider on balance. And some executive orders, like those enabling climate change to cook the world, carry far more weight than routine directives, and we have to evaluate specifics to get an accurate picture. And then saying that we shouldn't look at specific executive orders lets harmful orders cross off the hook and shields from scrutiny. If they cite examples that say that crisis response to prove the app and specific cases matter, you can't cherry pick what examples count. Remember that the app has to prove that on balance, executive orders do more good than harm, and that's impossible without proving what executive orders do. But then on their case on Congress, remember that executive orders only worsen gridlock by increasing polarization, and then that is cyclical polarization leads to more gridlock, which causes more government inefficiency. And executive orders are not good at combating gridlock. And then they say that Congress acts when executive orders overreach, but turn back to their first point, subpoint, they tell themselves that Congress is designed to be slow and thus reject claims that executive orders can be unchecked when they can see that Congress isn't efficient enough to take action. And moreover, turning executive orders is difficult. That's Halliday 22, but specifically on their crisis response, look to the status quo. Trump executive orders are bad for crisis response. And then also on the example of COVID, they didn't respond that executive orders empirically sparked confusion, and that was harmful during COVID. And then specifically on governments, executive orders have allowed Congress to advocate for rulemaking authority, causing trillions of dollars in debt, and that's overall worse for government efficiency, because less funds means that Congress isn't as efficient. Extend Wallet 20, that sends that legislation is impossible, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Gridlock is fueled by executive orders. But then let's focus on climate. Rolling back climate regulations means that it is impossible to solve for climate change. It doesn't matter what number, there's every single number, but we read you cards that specifically say that before the executive order, we were on track to solve climate change, and with that executive order, it becomes impossible to solve climate change. We read that it is an 80% reduction, and we read cards that say fundamentally the whiplash of executive orders have essentially sealed our fate for climate change. Climate change will become an unstoppable role of getting hotter, which is existential. Remember that 0.1 degrees Celsius means 100 millions of deaths, which means that our impact adds up to billions of deaths. No executive order in history can offset the negative effect of causing billions of deaths, meaning that on balance, executive orders are objectively worse. And then remember what Nelson says in Second Cross, that even if courts and Congress can or are checking right now, the presidents are still not following. So when you're weighing, you have to weigh that on balance, 100 million deaths per 0.1 degrees Celsius. They didn't respond to the fact that climate change was solved before the executive orders, but after, it's not happening. So now, 0.1 degrees Celsius means 100 million deaths. Climate change is getting hotter and hotter and hotter. That's going to cause billions of deaths overall. That outweighs any impact that they could potentially have, because no executive order in history over there, how many years, could ever be better at solving. Current costs?
You can.
since you guys go first, do you want first question?
Okay, yeah. Like, let's talk about like this idea of climate change cooking billions of people.
Yeah.
So the American system of executive orders is going to kill billions of people because of climate change, right? Which is a global issue.
Yeah, but you guys also concede that like in 2017, when Trump actually pulled out of the Paris Accords, what happened was that other countries followed. That's why we say that.
Wait, we don't concede that. We say that right now is different because in 2025, half of the countries in the world are 5 years past their emissions peak, meaning the transition is fast enough, and it's like it doesn't even matter if they pull out of the climate accord now if they don't even have a high enough.
Okay, but we read you cards that specifically say that on track, we are not on track to
Well,
solve.
we're talking about the growth. Your impact is talking about the growth. Like,
Yeah, and we read you that the U.S. is like the emission, like the hegemon in terms of like emissions.
There's no
We are-
internal link between those. You don't say how much emissions the U.S. increases leads to how many emissions the world increases and then how many people die.
Right,
Like
but
you just
it
talk about
also
the US
doesn't matter.
emissions.
Like the fact that the countries may be 5 years ahead doesn't necessarily mean that
It's not
with
maybe.
withdrawing from the Paris Accords that we're going to be able to solve for climate change. Like
Okay.
you guys still concede the fact that the countries are going to be the U.S. as a leader, and when we withdrew that.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Sure, go for it.
When we withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords in 2017, like, how can we still solve for climate change now?
Because
We're
we'd
not.
say it's a lot worse now, right? Like
Wait, we're not
2017.
So how is it a lot worse now than when countries have already hit their peak and it came down 5 years past, right? Other nations in the world are down on emissions. So if they're down since 2017, how can we solve for it then but not now?
Right, because again, you guys also, like, it doesn't matter the fact that they're 5 years ahead. That doesn't necessarily mean
That means they're
they're
doing better than they were in
Yeah,
2017.
more than
They're- okay,
50%
the
of
fact
the
that
Also,
they're doing better
specifically,
doesn't-
the U.S. is the by and large the largest emitter
So
of emissions.
okay, wait. So one country matters more than 50% of the entire world.
It's not only that they do matter a significant amount enough to cause climate change, but other countries are also going to follow them.
All right, you can say it.
Sorry.
Okay. I guess like let's get back onto like even if Congress or the courts are able to check, will the presidents follow? Like will they listen?
They don't have a choice. It's not like, can you please stop doing this type of thing. It's more of like the action is stopped.
Yeah, like there's no, like, once an executive order, let's say, like, once the courts rule an executive order as unconstitutional, the agencies can no longer figure out that executive order. Like, this isn't like,
I mean, but like if they keep going, like, it's considered a crime, and they'd either get arrested or stripped of their
and like the
property.
most important thing that like you never contest in this round is the Peterson 19 evidence that says as like the executive has gained power, so too have the courts, so too have the states, and all that becomes their stuff, right? So we're seeing like effective checks and balances right now.
All right, sure. You guys can take a question.
All right. Like, let's talk about like. Okay, never mind.
That's what
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, that's correct.
we'll use this right.
This will just notice. Is everybody ready? Alright. We'll start in 3, 2. The system the Founding Fathers envisioned has worked for 200 years, and the Founding Fathers envisioned a system with executive orders. The con side of the debate wants to throw the baby out with the bathwater for one bad policy. One bad climate policy in one man's 4-year term does not outweigh 14,000 other executive orders in 200 years of American history that has kept our government afloat. Let's talk about this climate argument. Remember the fact that you don't know anything on this contention. You don't know how much emissions are going to increase following this regulation. You don't know how bad this is for global climate change, to the point they never respond with or flow through their impact, or they never link out their contentions with global numbers. All you have is that the climate change is going to get a little worse. You don't know how by how much. You don't know how to weigh that against anything else. Don't let them get up here and tell you it's going to kill billions of people when we show you with evidence from this year that comes out when Trump's in office that climate change is on the decline in almost half of the world. What we see is it's all okay now. And that's because of the only voter in today's round. The system is working. They never respond to the fact that we need executive orders to function our government fundamentally. We need them to, 1, direct the bureaucracy, which they never respond to. We need them to, 2, fine-tune policy decisions from Congress, which they never respond to. We need them to, 3, cooperate with Congress. We see them historically, like in the civil rights movement, provoke Congress into taking action and provoking gridlock to be broken up. What we see is that we need them in a crisis too, to the point they dropped the fact that an executive order saved us from the existential threat of the Great Depression, threatening the lives of 125 million Americans, or made 200 vaccines during the COVID-19, or 200 million vaccines in the COVID-19 pandemic. You always know that the executive order is the first tool and the best tool to use in times of crisis. For every time that we need our government to function, which is every single day, to secure your rights, your liberty, and your pursuit of happiness, you always vote for the affirmative because that's exactly what the executive order does.
We don't like when you get up in front. I'm just going to let that down.
I just forfeit over them. I'm not gonna lie. Like, there's no way.
It's just going to be their side, our side. Okay. Is anybody not ready? That's good. Tell me to get on my first word. Okay, start on the framing. Remember that in this debate, you have to weigh the impact. If we can prove that a single executive order can outweigh dozens of minor benefits, then you should vote for us. Start on their side of the flow. Extend Holiday 22, that executive orders worsen gridlock with immediate reversals, increasing polarization. That's what they concede. Remember, it's a prerequisite for their case. If EOs increase polarization, then legislation becomes impossible. And to Tele 24, that it's cyclical. Then extend McNeil 25, that executive orders are actually used less during times of gridlock. That's what they concede as well. But then let's go on crisis response. Remember that they concede NORWAT 24, that Congress and the courts empirically do not check. They just say that we concede that Congress is checking right now. No, our analysis is that even if Congress or the courts are checking right now, the presidents won't listen either way. But then they also don't respond to Holiday 22, which finds that overturning an executive order is difficult. Then, specifically on their examples, they say that we concede COVID. No, remember ROM 20, which finds that EOs empirically spark confusion. Then, on governance, extend Yeatman 22, that executive orders have allowed Congress to abdicate its rulemaking authority, causing trillions in debt, and that's overall worse insofar as less money means that Congress cannot act as efficiently. With that, go to climate. Remember Burr 25, that Trump's return puts climate progress at risk, and Simmons 25, that Trump has already signed 26 executive orders which directly altered environmental policy. Linwell 25 finds that rollbacks dismantle federal climate regulations. Without them, the goal of curbing pollution will be completely out of reach. And MIT 24, that the U.S. will be key in spearheading clean energy transitions as the largest emitter. Bennett 25 continues that climate action operates on a narrowing timeline. Delay right now are deadly, and not Crop 25, that gridlock prevents legislating permanent climate protections without regulation. Spectre 19 concludes that extinction is inevitable at best. Casella concludes that millions died. They extend a couple responses. First, they say that countries are on the path to solve for climate change, but that doesn't matter insofar as even if they're 5 years ahead, it doesn't actually mean that they're on path. Then they say that we don't quantify how much emissions go down, but remember that the problem is with consistency. Executive orders allow for constant changes, and on the weighing, remember it's the biggest voter in the round insofar as it affects everybody, and it's a prereq. We cannot solve for all their impacts if everybody is dead. Thank you.